It is a joy to see all of you here this morning. My name is John Whitvliet, Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. It is a joy to welcome you and to be together for these days of learning. And we also say a welcome to those who are joining via live stream and are learning with us from places all over the world. Thank you so much for being a part of the year-long learning community that we love to be a part of here at the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship and the Center for Excellence in Preaching at Calvin Theological Seminary. I would love to introduce this morning's session by taking us back to the Heidelberg Catechism. The Heidelberg Catechism, a source of instruction and encouragement, it represents the tradition of Calvin College and Calvin Theological Seminary, which is our host institution. And I'd like to take you to the line in the Heidelberg Catechism where the question is asked, what do you understand by the communion of saints? And here is what the Catechism said: that believers, one and all, as members of this community, share in Christ and in all his treasures and gifts. And second, that each member should consider it a duty to use these gifts readily and joyfully for the service and enrichment of the other members. The communion of saints. It is our prayer that this conference is an experience of the communion of saints, that it is about sharing and receiving gifts from one culture to another, from one denominational tradition to another, from one area of giftedness within the church to another, theologians and pastors and students and pastoral caregivers and musicians and artists and chaplains and so many others, all learning together. And this morning, it is my joy to be able to introduce this plenary session and to celebrate the arrival of a book that I would like to introduce to you as a prime case study of the communion of the saints. This brand new book, One Lord, One Faith, One Baptism, is an ecumenical curation of the gifts that God's Spirit has lavished on the church. And this book is an experience and a case study of the communion of the saints in so many ways. It is a case study of the giving and receiving of gifts across the spectrum of African American Christian traditions. It is a case study in the communion of the saints between and among different cultural contexts, as this wonderful committee I'm about ready to introduce participated in the giving and receiving of gifts across cultures and continents and centuries. It is a case study in the giving and receiving of gifts, not only in the form of songs on a page, but people and the stories behind the songs that we sing and the people who make the choices of music that are sung and that the people who bring that to life in congregations every week. And before I introduce the committee, let me also say how important it is for me and all of us to say that a session like this about a book which curates the communion of saints is a case study in the communion of saints and is important for all of us, including those many dozens, if not hundreds, of people represented at this conference who are not from hymnal-using congregations. For all of us, curate the communion of saints as we select music, as we give rise to congregational repertoire, as we make choices about what historic songs to preserve and what new ones to sing. And so case studies in curating the communion of saints can become instructive across that big divide, those of us who use hymnals and those of us who don't. So this invitation into the communion of saints, I'm happy to say, will include this morning the leadership of representatives of the Abbington Academy in Music. We're grateful you are here. Thank you so much. These are students who have been involved in the Summer Hampton Ministry Conference in Hampton, Virginia, and represent graduate programs and music programs across the United States and Canada. They're led by Professor Emmett Price from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Will you please join me in welcoming the James Abbington Church Music Academy students? And then if you will turn to about page 3 in the book that you've all received, and turn to that page that says Committee. There is a parable by having the whole committee, with just a few exceptions of folks who couldn't be here, represented before us today. So when I call your name, if you raise your hand and we can celebrate your presence. And I'll begin at the bottom of the list of committee members, how grateful we are for the Reverend Lisa Weaver, consultant in this project, member of the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship Grants Board, frequent presenter here at the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. How grateful we are for the Reverend Anthony Vinson, representing the African Methodist Episcopal tradition. We're grateful that Judith Christie McAllister is en route to Grand Rapids even now and will be with us later in the conference. We're grateful for Dr. Carl MaultsBy, representing the Episcopal tradition. We're grateful for Bryan Johnson, representing the UCC. We're grateful for Birgitta Johnson, ethnomusicologist, University of South Carolina, a wonderful scholar whose insights recently appear on the Calvin Worship Institute website, a feature article. We're grateful for Jason Max Ferdinand, representing the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. We are also grateful for the contributions of Grace, Ingrid, Faniel, and Leo Davis, who could not be with us for this conference. We'll have them back at some future time. We're grateful for the collaboration in so many ways of Robert Batastini, Bob, and the GIA, frequent collaborators with us here at Calvin. And then great pleasure for me now to turn the microphone to Dr. James Abbington, editorial leader of this project, member of our grants board here at the Worship Institute, longtime worship collaborator. Over at the Conference Center, we have a room known as the James Abbington Room. Because of his many frequent trips to Grand Rapids. I think it's now 15 years, Jimmy, and probably at least 40 trips. We are always glad to have you here. Will you please join me in welcoming this wonderful group of leaders here today?
Good morning. And thank you so much for that warm introduction, John. I am always delighted to be here at Calvin College, where I feel like I should be an alum by now and would be a very proud alum. Today is a very special day for me, having sat on many hymnal committees and worked with groups, but to actually chair a hymnal committee and to have such an outstanding group of people to work with to produce what is really a very historic publication. When you think about denominational hymnals, and those of you who have been involved in that, you know what those committees are like, don't you? But imagine having to work with 8 different denominations, and it could not have been more harmonious and more enjoyable. It was absolutely wonderful. And what you hold in your hand is the result of that. Every time I do a presentation like this, I invite the audience to do something, and I'm going to do it for you right now. If you would turn to the inside cover of your hymnal and write these words: stolen from, and then sign your name underneath it. Even though we're here worshiping God, Satan has a way of coming in with sticky hands and other ways, and we don't want you to lose your hymnal. This is yours forever and always, so make sure that you identify it, and that again is thanks to Calvin College for providing this. So, stolen from your name. So having said that, so that you will know, and also be sure to hold on to that for other sessions that we will be presenting, and particularly this evening for the Vesper service, we will be using this hymnal, so keep it with you. In a culture dominated by entertainment, hyped up immediacy of feelings, manipulated desire, and forgetfulness of being, the Christian church needs more than just extensive singing of crowd-pleasing, fun, upbeat, and sentimental music. You know, I call some of them 7-Elevens, and I don't mind a 7-Eleven. You know, sometimes we have to run into 7-Eleven to pick up the things that we need. But this 7-Eleven are those songs that have 7 words that you sing 11 times and then modulate and sing those same 7 words 11 more times. And if the desired response is not there, you modulate one more time and sing those same 7 words 11 times. But we need 7-Elevens in our life, and we've got some 7-Elevens in the hymnal. But I also believe that we need a hymnody that is rich biblically, with being biblically sound, theologically sound, and culturally relevant to where we are today. That is what we have used as guiding premises and objectives in compiling this hymnal. As Bryan Wren said, whether contemporary or traditional, hymns should be one or more of the following: formative, transformative, cognitive, educational, and inspirational. And I believe that. Fortunately, the members of the core committee shared that same philosophy, and that's what has led us to today. Well, a vision without provision demands revisions. And so, fortunately, this vision did have provisions, and none other than GIA Publications, who has certainly been a leading producer of African American sacred music, was the company that we used, or that we sought out about this project. And the project director is my brother, Bob Batastini. Now, I know you wonder about that, but we're brothers. He's the older brother, and I am the shorter one. So at this time, I'm going to ask Bob to come as our project director and the senior editor emeritus of GIA Publications. And he's going to go over to the mic and to the stand.
Thank you, Jimmy. GIA was founded 78 years ago in 1941. Present management began 52 years ago in 1967, which is the year I began my work at GIA, along with the father of our current president. Ed Harris was the father, and he still shows up in the office once in a while. And his son, Alec Harris, is the current president of GIA. Alec, stand up. Let him see who you are. GIA has 3 major divisions: music education. Walton Music is a division of GIA, and that's high-end choral music. And our largest division is our sacred music division, which concentrates entirely on music for the church. A focus that is very dear to our efforts at GIA lies in the area of congregational song, hymns, psalms, spiritual songs, and service music sung by the people in the pews. To that end, we have published more than 30 hymnals, the newest of which you hold in your hands. 5 of those hymnals have been prepared for African American congregations by committees of outstanding black church musicians, such as the committee who prepared this edition, most of whom are present today. I'm proud to say that my job over the years has been to coordinate most of those hymnal projects, including the 5 just mentioned. Almost 20 years ago, we were blessed to have Dr. James Abbington join our extended staff as the executive editor of our African American Church Music series. There's a wealth of material produced through his collaboration, including this hymnal, as well as several hundred choral octavos by African American composers. When we published our first African American hymnal in 1987, it was unveiled at a conference much like this, and the editors were present, and many of them spoke. At the end of the presentation, one of the editors held up the book and matter-of-factly said, "Of course, we don't sing the songs the way they're printed in the book." Ed Harris almost fainted. He said, "What did she say?" He said, "Why don't we print them the way they're sung?" Well, it's no secret that the performance practice for much of music of African American church only references the printed page roughly. By the next time we took on our next project in 1993, it was called the African American Heritage Hymnal, came off the press in 2001, we made a commitment to reflecting the performance practices of the black church music on paper. For that hymnal, and the three which have succeeded it, GIA committed to commissioning gifted arrangers to put on paper that which generally only existed in the talents of gifted performers. It's a bit like jazz. I love jazz. I can't play it. I don't have that gift. I love gospel music, and I also don't have that gift. But there's nothing, so the idea of commissioning writers to at least approach the performance practice found in the church has brought this much more forward, and it has enabled people like me to get access to this music. No one claims that this is the only way it is played and sung, but all seem to agree that the way most of the music is edited in this hymnal does approach performance practice much better than the four-square way most hymns are printed in most hymnals. I know you want to sing, so I'm going to quit talking and turn this back to the music makers.
Thank you, Bob. Before we begin singing, I do want to ask Dr. Lisa Weaver to just explain a little bit about the organization of the hymnal. That was important. It was easy to pick out hymns that we wanted and things that we thought would be important to add to this collection, but the question of how is it organized, what are the contents of this hymnal? I'm going to ask Dr. Weaver to speak to that.
If you look at your table of contents, thank you, Dr. Abbington. If you look at your table of contents, you will see how we have organized the hymnal. As has been said, there are 8 different African American traditions represented. And some of them are Episcopal traditions that follow lectionaries in the Christian year, and so they have a certain rhythm. And a lot of them are free church traditions where there is autonomy in each of the local churches. And so in order to have a hymnal, a volume that was useful for the whole scope of those represented, we had to kind of blend 2 orders, if you will. And so you will see in the beginning that we break it down according to the elements of worship. We gather. In our gathering, what do we do next? Adoration and praise. And so we organize it according to the elements of worship. You will see grace, word, prayer, and common ordinances or sacraments, whatever your tradition calls them, baptism and communion. In the second section, we move to order them according to the Christian year. Our Anglican, Roman Catholic, Episcopal brothers and sisters will recognize a familiar order. And that year is organized according to the salvific events in the life of Christ. So we start with creation and providence, and then we anchor it with Advent. And we move through the Christian year through Christ the King. So we've ordered it in that way, and that is also a familiar entry point for people in those traditions. Following that, we organized this section according to how the gospel is lived out in the Christian life, both individually and corporately, personally, and publicly, and in addition, how we celebrate certain movements within the Christian tradition and the Christian life according to stages and rites of passage. For example, we have a section in the Gospel of Christian Life called marriage, because in marriage you are oriented to the Christian community and the world differently, and so there are hymns that speak to that. Ordination situates you to your Christian community and the world differently, and so we mark those. It is an African American ecumenical hymnal, so of course we have freedom songs. And that was important because they are songs of a tradition. They're not just historic songs. They're not just old songs. They are songs that have brought a people through a rough time in this country. They are stories that are embedded in the DNA and fabric of the Christian experience of African Americans, and they continue to speak. And we don't want that legacy lost. You're not going to hear them on the radio, but they are preserved in this book. Again, appealing to our more Anglican brothers and sisters in those traditions, we have service music. For many people in free church traditions, a canticle or an antiphon or a responsorial is unfamiliar language, and so is the genre. However, that section is here so that the Episcopalians, the Anglicans, the Roman Catholics can find music that fits their tradition and their experience. And then we have indices. And we wanted this book organized in this way so that everyone can engage it without fear and without judgment. Human beings, and it's not a judgment, we tend to operate in silos of our own social location, and that includes the church. However, this book is intentionally entitled One Lord, One Faith, One Baptism, and not just so that African Americans of whatever tradition can find their way in, so that the church at large can find their way in. So if you are a person of a free church tradition, or if you are a tradition of the book, of a service book, of a worship book, it is organized in a way that you can find yourself in it, but it pushes you to peek into someone else's tradition, to peek into someone else's history, to peek into another genre, and you might find something that works for you, that works for your congregation, or speaks to whatever your context is, whatever your church is going through, whatever's happening in the world. Lord have mercy. But there's something in it for every person and every context, and so that was our impulse, and that was our driving principle and philosophy in the organization of the book.
Thank you so much. Well, at this time, we're going to begin to sing of the 698 pieces in this hymnal. We will sing just a very few in the time that we have allotted for today. Several years ago, I was asked to come here for the January series and do a lecture entitled 100 Years of Black Gospel Music in an Hour. So, and I think I made it, but it was, I sweated through the whole thing. But anyway, at this time, I want to invite Reverend Anthony Vinson, who was our core committee member who represented and who is the International Director of Music and Worship of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or AME.
Good morning. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and we thank you for this opportunity. We were pleased to have several compositions submitted to be a part of this hymnal collection. And they represent the spectrum of music that is used in the AME Church, which is not a monolithic organization. It is very diverse and very varied. At one time, historically, the AME Church was founded in 1787 by Richard Allen, who was a freed slave. And at one time, all of our worship services looked alike. But as we have evolved over time, they're all very diverse and very different. And the contributions to this hymnal kind of reflect that diversity. We have two historic hymns, which are a part of the AME Church hymnal into our tradition, one by E.C. Deeds, Thy Way, O Lord, and another T.G. Stewart hymn, which is We'll Praise the Lord for He is Great, a very historic and traditional hymns. And then that tradition is carried on by a contemporary writer, Anne Henning Byfield, whose hymn we will sing this evening, O Come Give Thanks unto the Lord. But the hymnal also includes Negro spirituals arranged by Wendell Whalum, as well as more gospel-type hymns by James Hudson and by Lola Robinson, whose hymn we will sing this morning, Come to the Fountain, found on page 191.
191, Come to the Fountain. Could we have just a little light back? In case you haven't seen, I've got our singers back here, and they are going to sing along with us, but not here to entertain you. They are just to enliven and help sing along, but we want you to sing with us. This is not a concert.
The fountain, fountain of life, just drink from the fountain, shall never run dry. You just come to the fountain of life.
also involved in this project were our Episcopalian brothers and sisters. And at this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Carl MaultsBy to introduce the hymn and also to say something about what we have in this hymnal that is very distinctly Episcopalian.
Thank you, Dr. Abbington. It is a pleasure for me to be here and to see my esteemed colleagues again. When I received the call from Dr. Abbington to participate on the core committee, I readily jumped and agreed because I was on the Episcopal Liturgy and Music Committee from 2003 to 2009, and we've been working on a hymnal. It is yet to get done. and let alone, we're talking about an African-American emphasis. So I saw this as an opportunity to shed light on the Black Episcopal tradition. And I want to clarify that. Black Episcopal tradition. We have been in the Episcopal Church ever since Crispus Attucks was the shot up in Boston. And therefore, we have a tradition of composed music. And I wanted to make sure that the new hymnal would reflect that the historical tradition that includes people like Harry T. Burleigh, Horace Boyer, William B. Cooper, J. Rosamond Johnson, who wrote the song we know as Lift Every Voice and Sing. But also, I wanted to showcase the works of our contemporary and living Black Episcopal composers, such as Carl Haywood and David Hurd. David Hurd has the distinction of being the most published American composer who is African American. I also want to make sure that in our manual, our hymnal, that we reflected how we worship in the Mass settings, but Mass settings that come from a distinctly Black element. That is included in the hymnal. But before I get too far off point, I think we should look at hymn 513, When Our Confidence is Shaken. And it's composed by David Hurd, and the tune is called JULION.
May I just say something, Carl, as we prepare to sing this. 2 years ago, the Academy was invited here to Calvin, many of these singers who are here, and at that time we were working on this hymnal, and there were some hymns that they heard at that time that moved them, and this, When Our Confidence is Shaken, was one of the hymns. And while the text, as many of you know, was written by Pratt Green, this tune is called JULION by David Hurd. But I want you to know that these young people did influence that decision. Everyone singing. When our confidence is in belief with us secure, when the Spirit in its sickness sees what cannot find a cure, God is active in the tensions of a faith not yet assured. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Jason Ferdinand. Many of you have probably heard of the now world-renowned Aeolians. The Aeolians are the 2017 winners of the Choir of the World in Wales. And they were selected and have been traveling all over the country for years. And Jason was one choir director of the year for 2017. So we're so happy to have Jason. Jason currently serves as the chair of the Department of Music at Oakwood University and director of choral activities. Dr. Jason Ferdinand.
Thank you, Dr. Abbington. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Abbington, and so good to be here. Thank you, John, for this wonderful invitation. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a worldwide church. It's made up of about 18 million members in about 237 countries around the world. And my contribution to the hymnal was to ensure that some very unique things about our church's music was highlighted. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. How many of you know the group Take Six? Good, about 65% of you. Take Six is the most winning a cappella group in the history of music. Quincy Jones has called them the baddest cats on the planet. And Take Six was a group that was birthed at Oakwood University. Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama is what we call the black mecca of Seventh-day Adventism. It really is. However, the Seventh-day Adventist Church kind of came from some conservative backgrounds, and in the 80s, when Take Six was birthed, they had a very rough time even participating in the music of the campus. So, Take Six has been around for 30 plus years, and the first time they sang at the Oakwood University Church was last year. Let that sink in for a while. So, during the 80s, as in many other churches, drums were not allowed at that time, Hammond organs. You know, you go to Oakwood Church now, and the old pastors would probably roll in their graves if they see what we have now. So, guys that were in the group Take Six and other musicians in the tradition had to kind of rely on making the music very exciting by inserting harmonic elements, different vocal percussion elements in their music. One of the original guys in that group is a dear friend of Dr. Abbington and a dear friend of mine. Dr. Cedric Dent, original baritone for the group Take Six, was born in Detroit, Michigan, close to here. And Cedric, again, represents this very unique thing, at least for me. Cedric grew up steeped in gospel, Thomas Whitfield, but Cedric also is a very trained classical pianist. He went on to get his PhD in music theory from the University of Maryland. So very schooled, very skilled, and now he teaches at Middle Tennessee University as a professor of theory and vocal jazz. Why do I go all around to mention that? Cedric has a hymn in this hymnal, number 587, if you could turn there with me. Number 587. And very, very simple hymn in 4 parts, which for Cedric is a very unique thing as well. Cedric did his doctoral dissertation on the development of the black quartet. If some of you follow that history, you know groups like the High-Lows, group like the Singers Unlimited. And Take Six kind of was, those elements gave them some germ to form what we now know as Take Six and those jazz elements. So is Lisa over there somewhere? She's there. Could we just all sing number 587? We just sing the melody, but listen and pay attention to the harmonic structure of this. It may pique your ears a little bit. Let me go here so you can see. Lisa, if you could just give me like the last system, it'll be fine. So 3 and... listen to this. On to higher ground, we've come too far to turn around. Let's join our hands. There you go. And we'll pray for. Let's sing verse 2. Now you know it. Now really sing it. Stepping and stepping out in faith. Go to the parts and. Sound beautiful, marching. Marching on heaven bound. Praise to God, our hearts resound. And we have come along. We're striving on. Come too far to turn around. Let's join our. And very prayerfully. And we'll pray for. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Bryan Johnson, who was our core committee representative for the United Church of Christ, the Congregational Church.
It is so I'm glad to be here. Thank you, John, for the invitation, and it's such a wonderful feeling to be with my colleagues. I represent United Church of Christ. I'm the Director of Music at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, Illinois. We are the largest UCC church. The challenge for Trinity and really the church in general is really how do you combine the vertical praise and the horizontal praise of worship? We're good of celebrating God who we don't see, and we clap and say amen. But when it comes to things like social justice and when it comes to how to care for each other with poverty, sometimes we struggle with that. I represent the social justice and really the equality for gender with UCC, which is extremely critical for this hymn book. And I'm very proud that we did a great job of including a song, Sing a New World into Being. The text is wonderful, and it really highlights four different issues for me. One is gender, class, race equality. It inspires and challenges us to bring awareness to the growing population of the homeless and hungry. And we're also challenged to bring attention to those laws, legal systems, and economic equality that are unjust to all human beings. This hymn addresses equality for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And the black church has struggled with that a lot. I think we sometimes struggle with that in terms of being open and human to those who are different. But God is a loving God. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, right? And so that means everybody's included at the table. And so let's sing this song, and it's just a wonderful hymn that's inclusive, again, of not just vertical, but horizontal. 564.
Would you please stand as you are able and by your spirit? This is a good one. This is not one you sit down on.
Journey
Amen.
Thank you so much. At this time, I would like to introduce another member of our committee. I'm watching the clock, but Dr. Birgitta Johnson served as a music consultant to us, particularly in the area of praise and worship, which is one of her areas, and I'd like for Dr. Birgitta Johnson to speak at this time.
Okay. Okay, good. I will make it brief. Well, praise and worship music, I think about, we think about this as a hymnal. And I think actually this is even more than a hymnal, because it's just not hymns. In this ecumenical text, we have more contemporary modern gospel music, as well as the newest kid on the block, praise and worship music. And it's a very controversial genre at this point. And it's more because of how it's been used in our churches and how songs have been selected. So what we have done in this text was to not only pick some of the praise and worship songs that have almost become standards. You're going to hear some of them tonight at Vespers with Judith McAllister, who've become praise and worship songs that are also congregational, that everyone can sing, and not just that talented worship leader or that worship band who sings and we watch, but more of the songs that everyone sings, the congregation, as well as, you know, highly talented singer versus the people who can only sing in unison. So we've selected those types of songs that have become standards that can be used on a Sunday morning or Sunday evening or Wednesday night that engage the entire congregation and also engage that kind of vertical worship we spoke of. And definitely new writers and new composers, and getting them, as Bob mentioned before, writing them down as close as we can to the actual performance style. You get a nice, good skeleton, and then you can make your own adjustments based on the skills of your singers or what you have in your congregation. So we definitely included that. And so we have hymns, we have spirituals, we have contemporary gospel, you know, traditional gospel that has become standardized, as well as our praise and worship that's kind of come along right beside it. And definitely picking songs like, you know, Judith McAllister's works that have become standards, and others that can just, you know, come alongside to be these new traditions that we want to be inclusive of in our hymnals these days.
Well, and because of a commitment to the Church of God in Christ, or COGIC as we call it, Dr. McAllister was unable to get her flight out of New Orleans, was delayed, and when she got to the connection, she missed her connection, so she's en route as we speak. So you definitely want to be here tonight for Dr. Judith McAllister, who will be in the house. And you may know her "Oh, Give Thanks Unto the Lord," which we will sing tonight, and two of her other pieces. But I want you to turn to number 499. We can't talk about the Church of God in Christ without talking about its founder, Bishop Charles H. Mason, who was the founder of the Church of God in Christ. He was a partner of a holiness minister, Charles Price Jones, who wrote far more hymns than Mason, and occasionally Charles Jones and Charles Mason, the names get confused. But there is no confusion about this one song, "My Soul Loves Jesus." And so I'm going to ask Michael now. Michael, take it to church like they would at the COGICs down in Memphis. Rylan, where's Rylan? Rylan, to the piano. just watch me, because 1, 2, 3, my soul loves Jesus. My soul loves Jesus. My soul loves Jesus. Bless His Then in the Kojic church, you start feeling a little beat coming. And then you feel, uh-oh, and you feel that beat, you say, oh, hold on, here comes the earthquake. And that's when you know it's time. Well, that is our journey for this hymnal. Yeah, I love what Dr. Charles Adams said, and I will end with this quote, which is in the introduction of the hymnal, in my introduction. And I invite you, please, brothers and sisters, read the introductions and forward, because there's a lot of information that we could not share today. There are some other sessions, and we'll be going on with these things. But Reverend Dr. Charles Adams, senior pastor of the Hartford Memorial Baptist Church up in Detroit, who I had the privilege of serving for about 13 years, preached a sermon, All Things Are Yours. Yeah. From 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, verses 21 through 23. And I asked him if I could just quote him here. And he said in that sermon, I want it all. The wisdom of Lincoln and the compassion of Roosevelt. The heritage of Washington and the legacy of King. The social ministries of the Methodists and the strict theology of the Presbyterians. The pioneering protests of the Lutherans and the defiant spirit of Richard Allen. The kingdom keys of St. Peter and the glorious liberty of the nonconformist. The gorgeous liturgy of the Episcopalians and the intellectual honesty of the Unitarians. The spiritual fervor of the Pentecostals. Yeah. And the marvelous freedom of the folks called Baptists. I want it all because there is no place for narrowness and bigotry in the Church of Jesus Christ. Yeah. We are all in one, and we are one in all. One Lord, one faith.
Moderate.
Especially tonight, 7 p.m. in this place. It's very important everyone bring this songbook back with them tonight. Those who do not yet have one will get one tonight, and it will be a place to make music together, and we'll be able to take a little taste of the communion of the saints back home to all the places we go all over the world. Will you once again, as we leave this place, please join me in thanking this wonderful case study in the communion of the saints.
God, I would like to also, just as a quick note, I would just like to say, as a result of this project, well, I shouldn't say as a result of this project, but we are excited to receive news. In fact, I was there when Reverend Anthony Vinson stepped down as the International Director of Music and Worship of the AME Church, and his predecessor, or the new Director of Music for the AME Church, is Reverend Maurice Wright, who flew up to be with us. Would you stand up, Reverend Wright? And he will serve over the next 4 years as the AMEs embark on their new hymnal and worship book that will be coming out. So there's more to come. Thank you so much.